Hi, this is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is listening beyond the sound bites. Ben Kinsley is joining me, co-producer and co-host, and he's from Campaign for Vermont. And our special guest tonight is Pat Brennan, who is the chair of the Transportation Department in the House, and you represent
Colchester.
Colchester. Welcome. Our first
Nice
time
to
on
be
our
here.
show.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Nice.
My pleasure.
Pat, you said you've been chair for 9 years or thereabouts?
About 9 years now, yes.
That's great.
Yeah.
Means you're doing something right.
It's got to
I
be
hope so.
some
You
kind
are.
of record.
Yeah. And you have to tell a little bit, all our guests, we asked them to tell a little bit about themselves, and particularly what you do in the summertime when we track you down.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, I'm a retired convenience store operator for 20 years, and I also have a little side business in the summer. I'm a concession guy at fairs. I do fairs and festivals with Bloomin' Onion, food concession, and
Sometimes fried fish. You have you used to have a
not
fried...
anymore. Yeah,
Oh, really?
I enough's enough. I had too much going at at one time. So, and then the legislature. So it's a good fit.
Yeah.
The two really work well for me.
Thunder Road. What is the World's Fair down in
Tunbridge.
Tunbridge,
World's
Tunbridge.
Fair.
He's got one of the best spots. You've been there for years.
I have.
Because you were right smack in the middle of the action.
Yep.
Bloomin' Onions, check it out. It's very good.
Those are my favorite, by
I
the
know.
way. Out of all the fair foods, Bloomin' Onions are my favorite.
That's great.
Yeah.
So we're going to discuss the transportation budget next, but a little bit later on. But maybe you want to kick it off with some of the highlights of this year so far.
Yeah. So there's a number of things that go on every year related to transportation. There's often a kind of a catch-all transportation bill that goes through, and there's usually several line items in the budget for capital expenditures and whatnot. But there's some things I'm just going to kind of run through the list here, and we'll pick a couple out to talk about. But things like seat belts is back on the table this year. It seems to be every few years that pops up. Tougher penalties for cell phone use while driving. Of course, the marijuana bill, that's going to impact transportation. And then, safety on Vermont highways. I think everyone's seen the signs on, I-89 and elsewhere around the state of the number of deaths that have happened on Vermont roadways. And there's a fairly significant spike, is my understanding. So maybe we can kind of start there and then talk about how some of these other things play into that.
Sure. Well, the seatbelt issue got us started this year. As you said, we had a rash of unbelted deaths this summer, and kind of raised awareness and kind of caught my eye, and as well as other legislators. I got a lot of phone calls and say, well, what are we going to do? We have a secondary offense, which is a secondary offense is you can only be ticketed unless you can't be ticketed unless an officer pulls you over for a primary offense, such say a tail light or speeding or something like that. And if he really wants to send a guy a message about the seatbelts, he has to ticket that primary stop. So you could end up walking out of there with a $150
for
tail
two
light
things, right?
and a $25 or $50 ticket for seatbelts. So, we took testimony. I will say right up front that I am not the best poster child for seatbelt use. I haven't been good at it throughout the years, but given the facts and given the stats, I started putting one on. And got used to it. Once you get used to it, it's okay.
Right.
So we took testimony, a great deal of testimony, and we came to the conclusion as a committee that it was time to do something. I needed convincing. I put it right out there at the beginning and said, hey, we'll hear what they have to say. If I leave there convinced, I'll vote for it. The committee was ready to move with or without me, so it was going to happen. But the evidence is compelling. The fact that we can save a few lives on Vermont roads, the fact that we can increase usage by anywhere from 4 to 5%, that could bring us up to 90 to 92% usage. Those are undeniable facts.
Right.
So we moved in that direction. We brought it to the House floor as part of a larger highway safety bill, and it passed the House floor. It turned out to be the seatbelt bill, not a highway safety bill, because everyone was focused on
the seatbelt,
on primary seatbelts. Yeah. But it was a good, robust discussion, and passed the floor 133-7.
Wow, pretty
That's huge.
overwhelming.
Off to the Senate.
That's off to the Senate.
Where does the governor? He's thinking about it, right?
He's thinking about it. He's open for the discussion. I guess you could say he's waiting to hear what the Senate thinks, maybe. And governors in the past haven't been real supportive of a primary seatbelt as far back as I can remember.
Yeah.
So we'll wait and see. And it didn't. It got sent to Senator Sears in Judiciary.
Before transportation?
Yes.
Why was that? May I ask?
I
Don't
don't
know.
know.
Because everything goes to that committee.
Yeah, but-
A lot of
he
that
must
stuff.
have asked
but,
for it. Did he ask for it?
Possibly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh, interesting.
So-
Because people don't know, that's still a law.
Right.
It's as much of a law, what we're talking about is enforcement. It's still a law, you should wear your seatbelt, period.
Absolutely.
Right,
Yeah.
but I don't think people know that. It's a matter of getting stopped.
Right. Right.
So today, for example, the police officer pulls someone over for speeding. They walk up to the window and they see that the person's unbuckled. That's when they can ticket, correct?
Right.
Not if they see the person drive by and can tell they're not wearing a seatbelt, and then, oh, by the way, they're also speeding. It has to be when they walk up to the window after they've pulled the person over.
They have to pull the person over for a primary offense.
Right.
Okay.
So he can't see them unbelted and pull them over and then make up
Make up
another,
something, right.
something.
Right.
Or say you were speeding.
Well, so I guess what I'm getting at is what prevents someone, or does anything prevent someone from being pulled over and then put their seatbelt on?
Well, we've heard some pretty good testimony from law enforcement on that. They have got it figured out.
Yeah.
They've got a term for every little maneuver
you
you
move
can make.
like this, yeah.
The reach over, the
Yeah.
under the arm.
I think we've seen those commercials.
Yes, and
Right.
so they say they can tell.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're
Interesting.
well trained.
So who's pushing for this? Is it the state police that's pushing for this, or who's
Highway
advocating
safety
for?
people?
Yeah.
Highway safety people, the governor's highway safety folks, public safety folks, the state police, the local law enforcement. My police chief at home in Colchester is the president of the Vermont Police Association. She testified, very supportive. There's not a whole lot of people who aren't in favor of
She's
it.
very sharp. I heard her on
Very
TV on doing something on public safety, and she is really sharp.
She's really sharp. And yeah, she gave very compelling testimony in committee.
I think it's sort of time, did I say that publicly? Because I think when you come upon an accident and see what not wearing seatbelts do, probably change your mind pretty quick.
Yeah.
It does, and we heard testimony on that. Very
bet.
graphic
Yeah,
testimony.
right through
and,
the-
yeah, right through
Well,
the
even
windshield.
even inside the car, for example, if you have someone in the back seat that's not buckled,
Yeah.
suddenly they're, if you get in an accident, a front-end collision, suddenly they're a projectile.
Yeah,
And
right,
So now
exactly.
they're a danger to other occupants of the
Yeah, right.
vehicle.
Yeah.
And another piece of that is it's not just about your own personal choice, it's about how you affect others. Family that might not be with you,
Yeah.
Insurance, medical costs, and the traveling public that may come upon an
Yeah.
accident or be involved in the accident that you are, so.
I learned my lesson with my two grandchildren when they were little, because they learned it in school. Grandma, stop! You have to put on your seatbelt. Okay. So
Well,
I got in the
I
habit
grew
of
up
it.
with
You're right,
that.
it's a habit.
I grew up with
Yeah, it
that
is.
too. I think part of it's a generational thing because, my grandmother and my uncles, always drove trucks and they never put their seatbelt on.
Right.
But I grew up with that, and it was never a question of whether.
Yeah,
or not
you just
were
put it
gonna-
on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, kind of keeping on that theme, there is a couple bills I think this year on cell phone use while driving. What do those look like, and where might they be going?
Well, there's a part of that highway safety bill creates a civil penalty for junior operators who, are, let's face it,
Right. It's-
they are
it's a
some of the
habit.
larger offenders out there. Everybody is an offender. You see it daily. But we thought it was time to send a message, and this came from the governor's highway safety also in the agency, that it was time to increase the awareness junior operators as well. I mean, as soon as they get into the fray. And it's also necessitated there are highway safety grants out there from the Federal Highway Administration that we would be ineligible for if we didn't have this language. So it's a fix there too.
So part of it, so part of it's the federal dollars that are attached to it.
So what's the
Absolutely.
fine for the juniors? I know for grown-ups, it's $125 first offense and $300, pay attention,
the second.
for the second offense.
Yeah,
And
that-
that's for having a device in your hand.
Yeah, for using it while you're driving.
yeah, and that'll get you. You know
Yeah.
that'll get your
That'll wake you
attention. It's $100 the first offense, not less than 100. Oh, wait a minute here. Yeah, not less than 100, not more than 200. So it can be up to 200 for the first offense.
Wow.
So you're going to send that message, a strong message to a junior operator right off the bat.
Who may have to go home and talk to mom and dad
Mom
about
and dad.
borrowing money.
Right, right. So,
Yep.
so what's different about this bill, or this language, I should say, than the language for adults? Is it, for adults, I think it's you can't have the device in your hand. Is what's stronger about
Or
this?
using it, because if you're the only one in the car, they can check your cell phone. If you do like the seatbelt, you hide it or something, they can take it and see that you were driving and using it.
Right. Well, for adults it's a little more tricky because if you're using a hands-free device, that's not as
Yeah,
easy
yeah,
to tell.
yeah.
But is it just they can't use it at all? for
Junior
minor-
operators can't use it at all.
So even with a hands-free device, they
Right.
cannot use it.
Ah,
Correct.
Oh, that's good.
Which is, it's still, as soon as that law came into effect, I outfitted all my cars that didn't have the automatic technology with hands-free devices. So
Still not perfect, but
it's
at least
not
it's
perfect, but-
it's better
They
than it
can
was.
cause more accidents because you're there going, call Bruce McDonald, then it answers back, call Bob Palmer. No.
No.
And then I'm
Yeah.
screaming in the car about Bruce McDonald.
Yeah. So
Doesn't work
I
real
tend
well.
to turn off. I've got a 50-minute ride on the way home every night, and
Yeah.
I just tend to turn it off and
That's probably what I should do.
do my drive.
Yeah.
And then marijuana, of course, and this is one of the big contention points in marijuana, especially from the governor's perspective, was highway safety.
testing.
And testing, for impairment. And, I guess kind of ironically in some ways, we were just talking before the show that your name was on the final bill that passed, whether or not it was intentional or not.
Well, you should explain that in case. I gotta
Last
check
year,
that out.
I tried. Last year, we did a pretty comprehensive highway safety bill similar to the one that passed this year. I think, let me continue on that thought. So it passed out of our committee and off the floor and down into the Senate, where it got snapped up by the Senate Judiciary Committee and was a mechanism for the marijuana bill to head back up
love
to
it.
the House in the second to the last or last day of the session, which in that, if you recall how that went,
Yep.
we wouldn't suspend rules, so it didn't happen. It got hung back up on the wall. Kind of forgot about it, actually, other than the fact that we hadn't done anything. And then it resurfaced this year, and it was the marijuana bill with under the title Highway Safety.
Yeah, just so people know, once you title a bill, you can't ever change the title so that they can track what's happened to that bill.
Yep.
So,
So did it still have the highway safety provisions in there?
No.
Or? No.
they just
no.
they
So-
strike all.
so they
Nothing
did
to do
strike
with
off.
highway. It was a strike off.
But so those things did get through in a separate bill then?
This year they did.
Oh, this year they did. Okay.
They languished on the wall down there until we pretty much, we did move one piece out of there, and I forget what it was. It was a cell phone distracted driving piece out of there into another bill, but no, the
That's too
majority
bad.
of it stayed
You
there.
have always had a really good, strong committee with good members on it. What were they thinking about the marijuana, no testing, highway safety? Were they excited about this bill or not so happy?
Not so happy. We might have had one or two members who, maybe just one, who actually supported the marijuana bill, but we were a little put back that it was on a highway safety bill and that the body didn't see fit to wait another 10 days for the governor's report.
I thought that was
and
very bad visual,
Yeah,
very bad optics.
I don't know what happened there. We all voted for it, but well, the body as a whole chose not to wait for the study, so the bill passed. No provisions in there for highway safety whatsoever, and I don't know if you've looked at it, but we passed the saliva bill out of committee also.
Okay.
Good.
Saliva testing.
Yep,
That
right.
gives that's a very complex bill in itself. It gives the law enforcement folks another opportunity at roadside to test for the presence of a drug, not just
Right.
marijuana. It
But
tests
stop me
up
if
for
I'm wrong,
7
they
other
can't
drugs.
tell. It's like with alcohol, they've set a parameter that they
per
say
se
you're,
limit,
you're
yeah.
drunk if you're above this limit.
Right.
But there is no you're under the influence with marijuana. They don't know where that level is, right? They haven't determined
It varies
that.
by the person.
Yeah.
Kind of the same way that alcohol does, but it's even less predictable.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it languishes in the body fat of a person and can leach out.
I'm good.
And it can, it'll show up to 5 nanograms, they call it, and so like Ben said, it doesn't really the impairment level varies from person to person. So this bill would give law enforcement that tool
An extra tool.
at roadside to advance to the next stage, which would most likely be bringing the person down to the station, calling for a drug recognition expert to
Yeah.
come in and do the full evaluation.
Which takes about an hour, we
It does.
heard.
It does take about an hour, 45 minutes to an hour.
Wow.
Very comprehensive.
Yep.
And it doesn't waste time at roadside waiting for one. Currently, some of the roadside stops, the officer would call immediately for a DRE, and there are only 54 of them statewide.
Yep.
Sometimes not accessible. So you're waiting by roadside, and this expedites the whole process.
Wow.
Cool.
Yeah, I can imagine. So you took a lot of testimony, I'm sure, in your
Took a
committee.
lot of
Yeah,
testimony.
I bet.
Yeah.
Well, that's something that can be tweaked next year, or as you learn more, you can amend that bill.
Right.
Because
It's-
highway safety, everybody, even the state police are saying to expect more fatalities, more accidents on the highway, so it's going to be back in your committee, that's for sure.
Yeah, it will be. It passed out of our committee. It's in judiciary.
Yeah.
They've taken 2 solid days, the last 2 days on it.
Wonder what that means.
Well, it's not good. It came out of our committee 10-0. It's not going to come out of judiciary that well, but I think it will. I'm looking at a 6-5, 7-4 vote
And then
maybe
off to transportation.
downstairs. Judiciary
Senate
most likely.
transportation.
Senate possible, but judiciary first, I think.
Yeah,
They
but I'm
tend
saying,
to-
but it does
yeah.
have to go to Senate transportation to Dick
It
Masser. right?
definitely should.
Yeah,
Yes.
right.
Yeah.
Well, I think
Better watch that.
everyone wants a roadside test that's usable. I mean, it just makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
I think the key is there, don't expect to get a roadside test that gives you a level and by itself shows impairment.
Right.
It's going to show the presence, and it's not, like I said, it's not just about marijuana, it's about 7 other opiates,
Right.
heroin, cocaine, and it'll tell the presence, not the impairment.
okay, so the hour test really shows me,
Impairment.
Pat McDonald, am I impaired or not? Because there is no magic number.
Still not
So-
scientifically, though. It's a tool for him when you go to court and say, well, I had a reasonable suspicion, pull the guy over, he failed a field sobriety test, but he wasn't drinking. So I know something's up. So I gave him a saliva test, oral fluid test,
Right.
and it showed the presence
Of something.
of something.
So it's
It'll
one more
tell you
tool.
if it's marijuana,
Yeah, right.
Right.
or it'll
Just-
tell you if it's an opioid,
Oh,
just not how much.
right, oh, okay.
So then he's saying, well, I'm combining all these things, I'm to the point where I'm gonna bring him to the station, arrest him at this point, and then you're either gonna get a warrant for a blood test, or first thing you're gonna do is call a DRE and wait for him to show up
Which
and
is the
evaluate him. Drug recognition
recognition,
expert.
yeah,
We have
right.
54 of them, very intense program there.
Right.
Yep.
Well, we'll see what happens. I hope they come up with something, because I think you're right, people are going to get pretty angry with an hour and a half of testing or whatever,
Right.
an hour.
Well,
and
and I always get concerned whenever you have a subjective test. You know, I'd much rather, I think, just from a legality standpoint, have something that's yes or no. You're above.
Right.
You're above the limit,
that's
or you're
the alcohol.
not above. Right, and because it's not subjective. It's you were
Hard and
above or
fast.
you were below, and
Right.
you know, and it's really a lot more difficult with marijuana unless you're just testing for the presence.
I'm just-
And you are at roadside. It's not an
roadside.
evidentiary test. It's just to show the presence to
It's
help
gonna be,
the,
will it be a he say, we can't say that, he said, she said situation in court when the
well, at
officer
that
is there?
point, yes.
Yeah.
But he's gonna form his future moves on that, you know, on what that test says.
Okay.
So, obviously, you're not gonna convict on reasonable
Roadside.
suspicion and a roadside oral fluid test, but you're gonna take it that step further and then look for a warrant and a DRE.
All right, well, stay tuned. We'll see
So I
how
have
these work out.
One more question before I turn it back
Yep.
over to Pat. So there's a couple safety corridors in Vermont. Notably, there's one in Colchester and Winooski on I-89. There's also been, the state has identified an increase in accidents on Route 4 between Bridgewater and Hartford. What are steps that the state is taking to address some of those safety issues? I know that they tried an experiment last summer with the Winooski Bridge area on 89. Didn't seem to go all that well, but I'm curious
What
to
did
see.
they do?
Well, they had signs up that were basically identifying it as a safety corridor, and
Oh,
that there was
oh,
increased
slow down.
monitoring, and no one slowed down.
Yeah, right.
So,
Yeah, it's a tough one because you're in a metropolitan area, everybody's in a hurry. I'm talking about the Interstate 89,
right.
Winooski, South Burlington area. And it's, the signs are still up. It's the reduced speed, increased law enforcement in that area. Other than that,
What do you do? I read an article that the speed on 89 is like really high, like that people have been clocked going 100 miles an hour, and that's become a concern. So that's just enforcement, right? Just nail them, because I've seen.
that is enforcement,
Yeah.
yeah. There are 4 or 5 cases, I think, last year where a few were well over 100.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
Which
that's
is pretty surprising. It's not like a straight road that's, like you see out west, some of those
oh
longer,
my God,
straight,
they're
flat roads.
ridiculous, right?
It's. I mean, there's a couple sections that are fairly straight and flat, but by and large, it's not. So it's kind of surprising that people drive that fast. But I mean, even in the Winooski area, that's a posted 55-mile-an-hour speed limit. I never see people going 55 through there. I mean, speed of traffic in the left-hand lane is usually 70 or higher.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, and I travel that route every night,
Right.
and I think the only people who actually do the speed limit are people unfamiliar with the area.
Right.
A little tentative. It's tricky,
Yeah, right.
a little
Because
tricky
if you're
going
going
there.
100 miles an hour and something happens, you don't stand much of a chance to survive.
No,
You're just dead.
no,
Yeah.
even
I
a
think.
flat tire, you're
Exactly. You're
you're a
toast.
goner. Yeah.
Yeah, your car is rolling at
Yeah.
that point.
Yep.
So speaking of being toast and losing control of your car, I do a lot of research before this, that in Texas and some other states, that there was an issue about the safety of guardrails, that somebody, the manufacturer was in Texas.
Yep.
And so were we looking at that with our guardrails?
Yes, we
Yes.
did. And I forgot the manufacturer's name. I don't even know if I have had it. There was an issue. They call it the deadhead. That's the end of the guardrail.
Right.
That's supposed to break away, give way, and
Is that what the part that circles? sort
yeah,
of?
the circled part that you would hit before you get to the actual
How
guardrail.
sad I know that about guardrails.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm a
were
real
you head
killer
of
at a cocktail
DMV
party.
at one point?
Yes, I do. I know this stuff.
So she has experience.
Yes.
So yeah, there was an issue. They weren't breaking away like they were supposed to. Folding up like an accordion is what they're supposed to do. And some of them were missiles or just going right through the car.
Oh, wow.
And some people were killed.
Oh, my God.
And so we had 5 sites in Vermont.
Now, see, I thought you were going to say no.
No.
When I read this article, they talked about 4 states banning these guardrails
Yeah.
from Texas, and I thought I hadn't heard anything. I thought you were going to say no. Now you surprised me.
We didn't ban them. We removed them.
Yeah.
And we don't buy them anymore.
Right.
Maybe they fixed the problem. I don't know. But we did find where we had 5 locations in Vermont that were using that type of
Wow.
guardrail. So.
Well, I
they're
just saw
gone.
this happen a couple weeks ago. There was a car on 89 in Williston that clipped the end of a guardrail and rolled, ended up in the the southbound lane on the opposite side of the interstate because it had clipped the tail of it and then
Enough to
flipped.
flip it, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Because
pretty
you think
crazy.
those things are supposed to help you stop and keep you safe. Not.
Well, it depends on how you hit it.
Yeah,
You
well,
have
it
to
is.
hit it when they're
Yeah.
there, not
Yeah.
before you get to them.
Right. Yeah. Because you could tell like where the tire tracks went off, they just barely clipped the end of it, and it was enough because it sheared
That's
it off.
dangerous. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so one more thing I read, I have to quit reading. There's a $1 million van. Do you know about this? You do.
I do.
That you lease every 11 weeks, which apparently can inspect highways 10 times what we're able to do without this van.
It uses sonar, doesn't it?
It's quite a machine.
Yeah, that's what it looked like.
And I got to correct you a little bit on that.
What is that?
We lease it for 11 weeks
Each
a year,
But not at $1 million.
not every 11 weeks. No, no.
Oh,
The van, and it's a big van. We actually brought it up to the State House because we wanted to take a look at it and see
Cool.
how we're spending our money here.
Yeah.
It's an amazing piece of equipment. It uses sonar. It tests for rigidity in the pavement. It goes deep into the subbase and tells you what's happening below the surface.
Right.
It's just
didn't the WIM truck, we have one that was called the WIM Weigh in Motion that would measure something, but this thing sounds like it can do what
I
the
think
WIM
it's
truck.
probably a modified version of that.
Yeah.
It's just the reason we lease it is I don't think any state could afford one.
No, right. It looked really cool. I mean,
It is a
technology
cool-
has taken off in transportation anyway.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and this helps you figure out like what's the base of a road looks like, right? Because there's only so much you can tell from the surface, and
Right.
Exactly.
that allows AOT to kind of adjust, when they're planning what roads need to be paved.
And so there's no
know.
need then for the plugs. It sounds like this thing can really read into the depth of the pavement, because the only way to find that out is you take these plugs and then bring it to the research
The
lab
lab,
and they
yeah.
check.
Right.
Cool.
Well, because if a road is going to wear out prematurely, or if it's going to last longer than you anticipated, those are useful things to know.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly.
Yep. They
It's
are.
hard to explain to people why this was always a big issue in transportation. Why did you just surface coat it? Why didn't you fix it? Or why did you dig this one up? And because it's all got to do with the condition and the decisions you make about which is the most effective, efficient way to do things. And it's hard to explain to people why you
It
make
is.
the decision.
The biggest complaint we get in that area is if you pave say, let's just take Highway 2 going through Colchester, and you pave it. We just paved it, I think, in 2014, let's say, and we're paving it again in 2016, and the people travel it all the time. And it doesn't look bad. It's
Yeah.
not broken up or anything. People scratch their head and say, I've got a road over here.
Yeah, right,
Route
right.
7 is a
Looks like-
mess,
right.
and you're paving this one again. There's nothing wrong with it.
Right.
Well, through prioritization and the work that these machines do, by laying a thin undercoating on the road that looks in good condition, you're going to get the best life out of that
Right.
road. Whereas this road over here needs a total reconstruction
Right.
and has to wait a year or two.
That's right. It's the
So-
same with bridges too, when you
Bridges,
can
yeah.
see the rebar and everybody's screaming and yelling. That potentially could be more sturdier than another bridge that doesn't look quite as bad. So.
Potentially.
Right, because
Yeah.
you don't know what's underneath it.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah.
So I have one more question, and then Ben's going to lead us in a discussion on the budget. But
favorite topic.
Yeah, exactly. And we have about a half hour to do that, so that's perfect
Okay.
timing. You have DMV under your purview, and this year the big discussion at DMV is the inspection program. And I'd be glad to tell you what I've been trying to get them to do for years.
I'd like to hear it.
Just let it go while it's under, first couple of years, it's a brand new car and it's under warranty, let her go.
That's been tossed out there, and we listen to all those ideas. And all that, I was
Stupid
gonna say,
ideas.
We listened to it.
all that stuff.
Yeah, that's a,
No, we hear it, and you make a good point. Who could argue? I can tell you this about the inspection program as it sits now. We have tax problems, education problems, you name it. Marijuana, impaired driving on the roads, all these huge issues surrounding the state. And what do I hear as a legislator, and I'm not alone, the most from constituents? The inspection program.
interesting.
It is. #1 on everybody's hit list, I think, and because it's a change in the way we inspect, but not what we inspect.
Right.
So, with these new tablets, they're held accountable. It eliminates inspection shopping. You won't inspect my
Right,
car,
right.
but I know Ben, and so I'm going to go down and see him, and he'll pass anything.
Right,
and
right.
that happens.
Good old Ben.
It does happen.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
That happens quite
Totally.
frequently, and so it did eliminate that. It didn't change anything in the inspection manual, but it's an intense process, and I guess from what I'm hearing, we hadn't been, inspection stations hadn't been following the book, the manual, as well as they should. So it did help there. It was costly for an inspection station to get into the business. Some got out.
Yep, I heard that.
Yep. And I should add that right now, I made a phone call this afternoon. We have had a study committee studying that. We've had inspection stations. We've had a couple legislators on this committee to talk about what we can do to make it easier to inspect a car for safety issues
Right.
first. Let's worry about the sensor in the back, your backup sensor that
Right,
isn't working.
Right.
The way the inspection manual reads, I guess, is that if it comes with a car, it has to work. So you've got pieces of a car that you don't need to operate safely
Right.
or travel safely that are being failed in inspections, and some of them are very costly. Check engine light is one.
Right.
That's the big stumbling block for a lot of people, and the manual has been worked on for about 6 months. I guess
Good.
the report is ready.
Oh.
Just has to be looked over
So
by.
will there be more changes, you think, based on the, not this year probably, based on the manual?
Well, you might see it this year. I'm hoping that this manual lightens up on some of, I know it's going to lighten up on some of the requirements, make it a little easier to pass inspection for those
Good.
violations that aren't directly safety
Oh, that
related.
makes a lot of sense,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah.
Well, because does the manual specifically single out, check engine lights as opposed to maintenance lights? Because I know this is one question that I've heard. Because some cars have a separate maintenance light that oftentimes comes on at a set interval to remind you to change the oil or stuff like that.
That is true. They also have a sensor for low air pressure.
Right.
Yep, right.
Right.
Now,
TPMS.
if you have low air pressure and you take care of the situation, sometimes it takes 2 or 3 days to.
Oh, for the light to
Yeah,
go
because it's
off?
taking
To-
an average.
Yeah, so there were issues there. So we've actually allowed for a 1-year grace period for check engine lights so we can work on this issue. Hopefully, this report will.
Oh, that'd be exciting to see what happens.
Yeah, I'm anxious. We've had a lot of people asking us about it. And,
Who's working on the manual, a DMV? or-
DMV.
okay.
It's in Colonel Eleverda's hands
Oh, yeah, Jake.
as we speak. Yep, and he is giving it a once-over.
Good job,
And
excellent.
Brian Keefe had a bill on inspections, right? Can you give us kind of a 10,000-foot view of what that bill was?
Brian's amendment actually addressed that situation, but his solution to it was just to exempt the check engine light altogether. Now, keep in mind, while we're focused on safety violations, we're also under the gun from A&R to make sure
Emissions,
emissions
Yep.
are
And that's
properly.
That's a
oftentimes
biggie.
the culprit for a
It
check
is.
engine light. Is it?
I had a what do you call it? An air sensor, my little Honda CRV the other day. It cost me a couple $100.
Yep.
But that's some of the things people are saying. Oh, we don't need to fix those. Well, it improves your gas mileage for one thing if your
Certainly.
CO2 sensor is working properly, and the engine light comes on, something's wrong with your car. I like to know what it is and get it fixed. But
Yeah, well, I know, like a catalytic converter, for example. I mean, those things can be $500-600 to
Yeah,
replace. I know my wife's car has 3 of them because it's a V6, so it has
Oh, wow.
one on each side and then a downstream one.
yeah.
So,
Right.
it's,
So let's hop into the budget because going to lead that discussion there.
Right. So the budget, the transportation budget in Vermont is about $615 million. About $250 million of that is state funds, with federal matching funds and a couple other things in there, from my understanding. That covers a whole lot of different things. Paving, park and rides, bridges, things like aviation. We have a number of
Railroad.
airports in the state, railroads. Kind of what are the priorities, I guess, for 2018, and moving forward that the state is looking at for investments?
Well, I think, as usual, I mean, if you're asking the general public, it's paving.
Right.
If you're asking the Transportation Committee in either the House or the Senate, I'll speak for the Senate a little bit because I think I know the answer. It's structures. We've come a long way. I think you have that in your notes,
Yep.
as far as the condition of our bridges and culverts in Vermont. Those are the things you don't see. We did a little dog and pony show, we called it, when Senator Westman was the chair of the House Committee on Transportation, and went all over the state with press crawling underneath bridges, filming the underneath of every, not every bridge, but some of the bad actors out there. And the public doesn't see the underneath of a bridge when they travel over it. They get from one side to the other and they're good. But we were 45th or 6th in the country. I'm talking at the bottom
the
of
deficiency list.
on the deficiency list.
It's crazy.
Either structurally deficient or functionally obsolete. We weren't doing well, and so that's how we created the TIB fund, the Transportation Infrastructure Bond Fund, to address projects in Vermont that had like a 30-year longevity, which structures are right at the top of that. So that brought us back to. You have the numbers there?
I have the deficiency numbers. In 2008, we were 45th. 2016, we were 13th. And so we've been going.
That's pretty
We've
good
been really
improvement.
improving at
From
a
one of the
dramatic
bottom
rate.
to at least middle of the pack.
45th to
We're about the
13th
middle of the
isn't too
pack.
bad.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, and my understanding also with that is Irene kind of gave us an opportunity to hit the reset button a little bit, because we got a lot of these federal funds coming in. A lot of the bridges that got wiped out were deficient. So it kind of allowed us to hit the reset button on that.
It did it, and it allowed us to catch up on paving too. A lot of the projects that were in the books already that were affected, say bridges that were programmed in our T-bill were affected, were eligible for 100% FEMA money.
Yep.
So that freed up a lot
Right.
of state dollars
Right.
that we could put in paving. So it was, as bad as it was a boon for transportation.
Yeah. Well, and I remember driving Route 4 shortly after the storm, and there was a lot of new bridges and a lot of new pavement that went down.
Yeah. A lot of it
and-
by necessity.
And a lot of it, yeah, most of it was by necessity, but I think that it probably did help get the state caught up in some of that stuff.
It absolutely did.
And then there's things like park and rides, and even actually this is an interesting one. Wasn't on our list to talk about, but rest areas. There's just this
Oh, I
new
didn't
rest
put that
area
down.
in Berlin. That was the first one in the state, I believe, that was a private-public partnership,
Yep.
which is kind of an interesting model.
Yep.
Yep.
And they're all full.
And they're all full. I mean,
And
it's
sometimes
busy.
that one in, what is it, going towards Burlington? It's almost it's
The
beyond
Williston?
The
full.
Williston,
Yeah,
yeah.
that really needs to be
Yeah, well,
expanded.
because a number of them were closed under the Douglas administration as kind of a cost-cutting thing. But
Yeah.
slowly they've been reopening, and now this new public-private thing. Is that seen as successful? I mean, I always see activity there.
That is, and it's funny you mention that. We actually have a section in this year's T-bill that will enable, through legislation, the developing of, we call them P3s, public-private partnership. We have a few little examples. That's a great one. The one that was designed but never came to fruition in Randolph was going to be
right.
a really good
right.
example of a P3, but it hasn't happened
Now, is
yet.
Wayne Lamberton's, that's part of this P3,
That's a
isn't it?
P3.
Yeah,
That's the
is.
Berlin.
Have you been there?
Yes.
You must have been there for the ribbon cutting. That is spectacular.
Yep.
I mean, we just go there because, I mean,
It's the Maple Woods?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
great. It's great inside.
Yeah.
He's done an amazing job.
He has, and it's a tribute to Wayne and the Agency of Transportation. It's a very strict regimen to go through, hoops you have to jump through, and maintain those practices
That's great.
to stay in that program.
That's great.
Yeah.
It's a very cool facility.
Yeah, because it's right off the interstate, and
It is.
the trucks have a mile. They can get off without any special permits as long as they get gas and stuff within a mile. So
Right.
it's just,
Yeah. Well, and the pumps are set up for that. They have the whole section of pumps specifically for trucks,
Yeah,
and they have
it's
plenty
great.
of parking, and it's a great
excellent.
setup.
Food's good too, in case you.
It is. I have eaten
I'm
there
into food, so
a number of times. So park and rides. I'm sure you're aware of this one, but the park and ride in Richmond never seems to have enough parking spots, no matter how much
Right,
they
it's
expand
Richmond,
it.
that's what I was thinking.
It's not the only one. So are there any plans for investments in park and rides?
There are plans. We actually have obtained a piece of property in Williston
Oh,
for a pretty good sized park and ride.
Nice.
Trying to think exactly when it will. I think it's going to be. I'm not sure if it's this season or next, but yeah, we've been working on that for a few
Great.
years. It's a good sized park and ride and well needed in that area.
Right.
That may take a little pressure off the Williston park and ride.
The Richmond one,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean
Yeah.
the
And is that
yeah.
part of is that going to be part of the CERC bypass project? Because I know that's supposed to be coming up fairly soon also in Williston.
The James Brown Drive, part of the CERC alternative?
The CERC alternatives.
No,
yeah.
that's not part of it. We're looking, let's see, if you're traveling north, right up to exit 12, it'd be to your left as you're heading toward
Oh.
Heinsberg.
Okay, so
Okay,
kind of
right.
across from where
Yeah.
the hotel is.
Exactly.
And that's
Oh,
by there
cool.
used to be a butcher shop there, or a slaughterhouse.
Was it? Yes, you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good memory.
yeah.
Cool. So anything else that we missed that we should talk
Well,
about?
I think aviation, that's always a big one for
Aviation.
me.
Right now it is.
Yes,
Well, F-35s, right?
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that's another story. I'm 100% behind those F-35s. Good for us.
Yep, I agree with you. I am myself. Yeah, aviation, I think everybody knows we've had a few issues with that. We've combined the aviation department and the agency with rail.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah, and I have to tell you that so far it's worked out well. I
Right.
had my doubts, but it seems to be working out well. Some of our practices have improved, our oversight.
Well, rail is such, I don't know if we'll ever get, I don't think we'll ever get back to the way it was because.
It's getting better,
Is
but
it?
you're right. I don't know if we'll ever get. We won't. We're too small a state, and the infrastructure
No,
isn't
it's
there
not-
for
it's not there.
high-speed
No, right.
passenger rail. We know
Is the
that.
focus still on Rutland to Burlington? Is that still
Yeah,
the
and
main
we're
focus?
this close. We've got a few
Really?
more little
Great.
pieces of continuous rail to lay down, and we're
Good.
good.
What about the Montrealer? Is that coming back?
Still in the works.
Still in the works?
It's a kind of a joke among secretaries. Every time
Yeah.
we ask the question, it's 3 years away.
It's just,
I asked that 5 years
3 years-
ago.
it's 3
and it
years.
was 3 years away, and
Right.
I could ask tomorrow, and it'll be 3 years
3
away.
years.
But it probably is. I mean, there are issues with
Right.
border crossings. And,
Right. It seems
Right.
like the issues I've heard now are on the Canadian end.
yeah, and I think
Oh,
they
that's
are.
good.
And we've honed those down, and I think we've got those issues taken care of. It's all about pre-clearance right now.
Right.
How we
Yep.
get those people on that train pre-cleared. So
So they're trying to do with airports also that come direct flights into Burlington, like Toronto.
So you're pre-clear for immigration and for customs.
Right,
Correct.
right.
Right.
To pre-clear on for customs
That makes
on the
sense.
Toronto end as you're leaving. Kind of the same situation with the trains. You don't
That's
have to
right.
deboard the
So
train.
is multimodal still a phrase
it is.
is it? Are we actually focusing on multimodal? 'Cause
We do.
We
Yep.
do? Where are we doing that?
We're
The Leaning Tower in Rutland, is that it?
no, that's
Is it still
long
leaning?
gone. Yeah, no, we're committed to keeping what we have right now. You know, with things the way they are and the uncertainty in Washington with the federal budget,
Yeah,
we're
I
kind
was
of
going
like
to
trying
ask you about that.
Yeah, well, we can talk about that in a minute. Well, we'll get there in a minute. I can tell you what I know. and what I don't know. But as far as multimodal, yeah, we're doing a good job.
Good.
Michelle Boomhauer is in charge of that
Oh,
for
good,
the
I know
agency.
her.
She does a good job.
Good job, very good. So the other, I know one thing which isn't, I didn't see it sticking out in the budget, I actually read the budget, I have no life. But emergency management, because if there is a department that needed to be recognized and celebrated after Irene, it was the Department of Transportation. And there's a lot of responsibility on that agency and the funding and what happens. And I'm assuming that that's gotten a lot of attention in the budget, one would hope.
It has,
Because-
but I wanted to say, and I'm going to be wrong on this, that it's a separate entity now. The agency is still has oversight,
Yeah?
but they kind of run themselves now.
Ah,
Emergency
okay.
management. Joe Flynn,
Yes,
as you know,
right.
was running that show. Now
Yep.
he's the new secretary, doing a great job, I might add.
Yep.
Very.
So it doesn't come through your committee, the emergency management part? Where would it go to?
This
Or
is
does
where
it?
I'm going to get myself in
Okay.
trouble. It may be general fund.
Oh, I see.
We might take
That's
a,
why I didn't see
Yeah,
it. Oh, okay,
yeah.
well, that makes sense, because it's not just transportation.
No, it's a-
Emergency management is
It's a big ball.
public safety,
Yeah.
is everybody, agriculture, it's so, maybe they're putting it in a separate bucket.
that's what's happening.
That makes sense, actually.
Yeah.
That's good. So, and the other one, our favorite topic is the Lake Champlain cleanup with the runoff from highways. And are you involved in that discussion at all with
Yeah,
stormwater runoff?
The stormwater discussion is happening in transportation a little bit. Well, as far as the budget goes, we contribute right around $14 million, various pots of money, but it all ends up in stormwater. We have grants to towns. We have all sorts of things going on. Anything we do now, as far as a project, requires best management practices for stormwater.
Great.
So there's a very keen eye on that. The majority of that work, and as far as what gets done with that money, happens in the Agency of Natural Resources,
yeah, sure.
and it funnels through the Fish, Wildlife, and Natural
I
Resource
knew you'd be
Committee.
involved in that. That's
Well,
our favorite discussion
It's
here.
one of our, it's definitely one, that and microbrews.
Yeah, we talk about, you want to talk about microbrews, Pat?
I love microbrews. They're my
We're
favorite.
doing a show on microbrewing.
Are you?
eventually. Yes, we are.
Well, it's interesting, I think, because the last year the governor used infrastructure bonding to backfill the water quality efforts, the funding for water quality efforts, and I think that's an interesting concept because we don't really think oftentimes about our waterways as being infrastructure.
Right.
But if you dial back 100 years, it absolutely was part of our infrastructure because we were transporting things up and down rivers and lakes in Vermont. And before the railroads came through, that was our primary source of moving goods and services. So I think everything from these huge log drives coming down from Canada on the Connecticut River to shipping granite out of Burlington Harbor and putting it on the Hudson and shipping it south. So it's been a part of our history, and I think it's important for us to continue thinking about our waterways as infrastructure.
Right. So you was talking about performance, and I think maybe you could talk about the performance. Oh, I know. We should ask you first. Any big projects coming, or are we just fixing what we have?
We're fixing what we have.
Good
There are
decision.
no new construction, other than one of the biggest and most interesting projects we're going to start undertaking is the North Hero Drawbridge.
Ah, interesting.
Oh, I have no clue what we're
Yep.
talking about.
We
Where
have-
have I been?
We have a drawbridge in North Hero,
Yeah,
that has a little operator's house on it. You've never been over that?
I think I have
I
now.
know
On
exactly.
my motorcycle,
yeah.
I think this is
It's the
ringing
one
a bell.
between Grand Isle and North
Yes.
Hero.
Yes.
And if you time it wrong, you have to wait forever. I've
15
been on it.
minutes,
Yes.
yes.
So
Been on
that
it.
bridge is in desperate need of repair. And how do you get around a drawbridge when
Right.
when you need a drawbridge, and you're going to deconstruct this bridge, and it's the only way.
What's Plan B? Yeah.
Plan B is to construct a temporary drawbridge, very costly,
Yeah.
and then redo this one. It's going to be a an engineering feat as well as I think they're talking 3 years maybe.
Wow.
And very cost $64 million.
Oh my word.
Wow.
How
Yeah,
about
it's-
just a barge with a flat top and go back and forth?
Well,
Like,
believe
like
me,
the bicycle
Oh yeah, right,
ferry on
exactly.
the, yeah.
The bicycle ferry, right?
Yeah.
Wow, but that is used a lot. Now that you mentioned,
it
we
is.
would take that just because it's unique, and we would ride our motorcycles. But you have to time it just right, or you're there for a while.
Yeah, in the summer when I think they open it at certain intervals, and the
Yeah.
boats will stack up and queue up out
Yep,
there waiting for
right.
the bridge to open.
Wow,
And off they go.
that's
yeah.
a lot of money.
It is a lot of money. It's
Whoa.
it's a very complex project.
Well, especially to build one that's safe and works,
Right.
because obviously there's big boats that go through there if you need a
Oh,
drawbridge.
yeah.
So.
Yeah, there are.
Well, there used to be one, and this is kind of interesting. There used to be one on the causeway, the Colchester Causeway, that was for rail. It was a railroad drawbridge, and you can still see the foundations of it.
Still there.
Yeah.
Oh, no
Right,
kidding.
I live out that way, and
Yeah.
it's we call it the little draw, the big draw, and
Cool.
the big draw is where the bike ferry operates. Little draw still has a path over it.
Yep.
So
Nice.
you can ride a bike right out to the big draw and
Cool.
off to South Hero on the ferry. Yeah,
Excellent,
Pretty cool.
Excellent.
So a very fun summer activity.
Yeah.
it is.
2017 performance goals for VTrans. I'm sure your committee is a little involved in these, but I'm just going to run through them. Maybe we can talk about
Yeah, I
two or
want to
three
talk
of them.
about one of them in particular.
We have a couple
I
more, so I'll
underlined
have
it.
to be
I
selective.
said, ask this.
I'll tell you what I know.
But updating the long-range transportation plan from 2009, improving project development efficiencies, ensuring every Vermont household is within 30 miles of an electric vehicle level 3 fast charging station. That one's interesting. Reduce the number of major crashes, and increase passenger rail capacity and usage in the western corridor. That's the Burlington rail section that we were
That is
talking
the
about.
Yeah.
Rutland to Burlington.
So if you want to pick one or two of those to talk
Pick the
about.
one I underlined here about ensuring every Vermont household is within 30 miles or less.
Yeah,
of an
well, I'd love to
electric
talk about that
vehicle.
one too.
Well, here's the story on that. 4 years ago, we had 300 electric vehicles in Vermont.
Really? How many did the state own? Do you know?
I don't know if they
Not
owned
many.
any at that point.
Really?
We do now, although the Agency of Transportation can put their finger on only one or two that they own. Now we have 2,300. That number, like today, it could be 2,500. There are incentives out there.
Right.
Yeah.
This summer,
That
there
number
were-
is going to grow
Right.
really, really
grow
fast.
rapidly. So
Yeah.
we're looking at, and picture there's no income for the Agency of Transportation, no
There's no-
usage charge for electric vehicles. We have no way to capture revenue currently. So that's an aside to that. So we're looking at, like you said, connectivity. So every family or every home in Vermont is within reach of a charging station 30 miles. That's in our T-bill this year. And I will tell you that that's not an easy topic to come to agreement on. We took testimony today actually on it, and it's complex, and we're a little bit like a fish out of water on this issue when you get into the utilities talking about, they're a little bit worried about the approach to this. There's the private sector out there that will own these charging machines.
Yeah.
You could have one,
Right.
buy the
No one can own
power, and then resell it to the
them. Businesses
consumer.
could own them.
It's a business proposition.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it raises some concerns over here, and it alleviates concerns over here, you know. But the key is they're coming. We have to get ready. And the next step is, how do we capture the money, the revenue?
Well, and that'll be.
You'll
we'll have
come up
to.
with some way
We'll have
out
to have
there.
it on for a whole nother show for
Yeah,
that
right.
one.
that is going to
But
be a long
I do
show.
think you see the success of even just Tesla, right, and what
Yep.
they've been able to do, and now they have a vehicle that's for mass market consumption. They're building 1,000 of them a week.
Is that
they
a
have-
hybrid with the gas?
No,
and
it's
electric?
100% electric.
Really?
100%.
100%
Well, we need
electric.
those connecting stations. then.
And they have a
Interesting.
300 and they have a 300-mile range. So, they're building 1,000 of them a week. There's 500,000 pre-orders already. So,
Wow.
and that's growing every day. So we know that the market's going to flood with them. And Chevy just released one also that's 100%
No
electric. That's very price competitive with the Tesla 3, and they can mass produce it. So they're coming.
Years ago when they were first coming out, they asked me to take home a truck and try it out. And because they wanted, Governor Dean wanted to use it for law enforcement. But when you press it down, it doesn't go fast. Because it's battery, it just goes, and you can't have a car that doesn't go fast for law enforcement. But I took it home, plugged it in, went into my house, and all you heard was, because I almost blew the house up because I plugged it in the house.
Such a draw. Yeah, too much of a draw.
So my husband's carrying on, so he fixed it so we could plug it in. But I wasn't thrilled with it, but that was so many years ago.
Yeah.
I know they
Yeah.
fixed them now.
Yeah,
come a
it's
long
gotten
way.
a lot better. Yeah, you can plug them into a standard house
No, you
outlet.
can't. It blows up
Well,
the house.
today you can.
Just saying.
And Tesla's come out with a home charger.
Oh,
you know,
really?
So yeah, so we have to figure out how to capture the revenue, and they're this close to minds that are way beyond mine are figuring out how to
Yeah.
capture the percentage of that usage from that meter, that house meter that is going through that charger.
Because the
Yeah.
revenue from
Yep.
from gas and sometimes it's going down.
It's declining.
Yeah,
Yeah,
bad.
for sure.
So you've got to come up with something.
Yep.
Well, and
Why did I
it's
say
interesting
that
because
in
in electric
public?
vehicles you could potentially do a per mileage thing because Tesla is recording mileage anyway, and they have a method to report. So that's a little more feasible than with the.
That'd be a usage.
It'd be a usage. Yeah, it'd be
Like
usage.
a vehicle miles traveled
Yeah.
Right.
bill. And
Yeah.
that may be the wave of the future, but I think we have to wait for at least a regional compact to form.
Yeah.
Because when you do that statewide, Oregon has a pilot program they're currently going through with that, but you don't capture any out-of-state revenue coming through your state.
Oh,
revenue.
and that's a big one.
Well, you
for
wouldn't.
a
big.
You
tourist
wouldn't with a
state.
surcharge on a well, charging station. Well, maybe you could.
If you
for
had a
some-
surcharge on
yeah,
the charging
on the
station.
on the
Yeah.
charging station, you wouldn't
Yeah.
necessarily on the home charging stations, but a public
Interesting.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Any,
the other-
any of these other ones that you want to?
Yeah, number of major crashes. How do you? It says reduce the number of major crashes. What are they doing for
Well,
that?
I
Just
think a
more
lot of it
enforcement?
is education. I mean, education and enforcement. It's tough to remedy bad behavior, but if you can educate people and show them that they know you're out there. Hey, we've got a 25-mile-an-hour zone in Colchester that they just hang. It's lakefront property, and they hang there. I know, and everybody else that lives in Colchester knows not to go 35 miles an hour through there, or you're going to get nailed. So I think with increased enforcement and just
Right.
the education piece, that's where the Governor's Highway Safety Program has come in really
Do
handy.
we
there.
use helicopters at all? Because we were out west. I think in some of those roads you're talking about, they used helicopter enforcement, and you
Yeah.
actually paid attention when
Yeah.
you heard the
Well,
sound.
you start nowadays. You can start using drones. You can do
Yes, you
drone
can.
enforcement.
Yeah, we
They've
haven't-
talked about that.
Yeah, we haven't got into that yet, though. No helicopters.
I think that'd be cool.
Well,
They do
drones
that
are a
in
lot
some
cheaper than
states.
Yeah,
helicopters.
exactly.
Sure are.
As long as they make a lot of noise, you can hear them. So, Pat, have we missed anything? We're kind of running out of time, and
No,
have
not that I
we've
know of.
covered-
I think we've covered quite a few things here.
Park and rides are getting really, not park and rides, so bike paths. That's just everywhere. I've been working on one in Barry now for like forever,
Mm-hmm.
and we're finally getting it together. It's great.
Yeah, they're
People use them
come a
all
long
the time.
way.
Yep.
Come a long way in that world. We how much time do we have?
Oh, well, just a few seconds.
Okay, now we'll get into the
Oh,
ATV piece.
Do what?
We have an ATV bill that's going to make things better for ATVs. Brings everything in line with the
excellent.
way VAST and snowmobiles work.
Oh, perfect. I
Yeah.
forgot about
Oh, they didn't have the
ATVs.
same standards for that
Yeah.
too.
No, they're totally different
Oh, wow.
organizations.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, we
Cool.
have run out of time, and I thank you very much, Pat. It's great
Thanks
to have
for
you on.
having me.
It's
Thanks,
an
Ben.
hour went
Yeah.
fast. Thank you for listening. In the meantime, we'll see you next week, and in the meantime, keep listening beyond the sound bites.